The words hit like shrapnel. You're just playing dress-up in a man's world. Petty Officer First Class Kira Blackwell stood in the equipment bay at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, the smell of salt and concrete heavy in the December air. The overhead lights hummed. The clock on the wall read 23:47 hours. Three Buds candidates circled her position like wolves who'd found something wounded. They had no idea what they were looking at. Jackson Brennan moved first. 6'3", 210 pounds of Division I football legacy and unexamined privilege. His grin was all teeth and no warmth. He'd been watching her for 2 weeks. The quiet instructor who ran an inventory, who kept her head down, who never raised her voice. Soft target, he'd decided. Easy. Behind him stood Derek Hale, former MMA fighter from the Texas circuit, hands like hammers, a face that had taken too many hits and learned to love the damage. He cracked his knuckles. The sound echoed off the concrete walls. Tyler Vaughn leaned against the doorframe, 22 years old with a sealed juvenile record and a smile that had talked him out of consequences his entire life. He held his phone like he was considering recording whatever happened next. Kira set down the box of medical supplies she'd been restocking. She turned to face them. Her movements were economical, precise, the kind of efficiency that came from learning to breathe quietly in places where noise meant death. She was 29 years old, 5'6", 127 pounds of lean muscle hidden beneath a loose PT uniform. Her dark hair was pulled tight in a regulation bun, but it was her eyes that should have warned them. Gray, flat, the color of winter storms over the Pacific. She didn't blink often. When she did, it was deliberate. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Her voice was calm, controlled. The kind of calm that came from standing in kill zones and making calculations measured in seconds and inches. Jackson stepped closer, used his size to crowd her space. "We've been talking," he said. "The guys in our class. They have questions about why a woman is working instructor duties when she's never been through the actual pipeline." Kira's hands stayed loose at her sides. Her breathing remained slow and even. Her weight shifted to the balls of her feet in a movement so subtle that none of them registered it. "Do you have specific questions about my service record?" she asked. "Or are you just looking for someone to bully after lights out?" Derek moved to her left. Tyler stayed in the doorway blocking the exit. Classic flanking maneuver. They'd done this before, maybe not here, maybe not in uniform, but they knew the choreography of intimidation. Jackson's smile slipped. His jaw tightened. "Maybe you should prove you belong here," he said. "Maybe you should show us what you learned in whatever desk job you've been hiding in before you took this billet." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a training cadre was running Hell Week candidates through the surf. The sound of the ocean was a constant rumble, a heartbeat. The base never slept. Kira looked at each of them in turn. She took their measure the way she'd been trained to assess threats. Jackson was textbook, all confidence and no discipline. The kind of man who'd never faced a consequence he couldn't charm or buy his way out of. Derek was the enforcer. He'd get physical when words didn't work. Tyler was the strategist, 2 steps removed from the actual conflict, ready to deny involvement if things went wrong. She'd seen their type before. Different face, same story. "You have 10 seconds to walk away," she said. Her voice hadn't changed, still calm, still controlled. "Before you make a mistake, you'll spend the rest of your careers regretting." Jackson laughed. The sound was ugly. It echoed off the equipment racks like a challenge. "You talk big for someone who probably can't do 10 pull-ups." He reached out, fast, aiming to grab her shoulder and shove her back against the supply rack. Just a little physical intimidation to put her in her place. His hand never made contact. Kira moved, not in a flash or a blur, but with the kind of economical precision that came from 1,000 hours of close-quarters combat training. She redirected Jackson's arm, used his momentum against him. His own weight and speed became weapons in her hands. 3 seconds. That's all it took to have him face down on the concrete floor, his wrist locked behind his back at an angle that made his shoulder joints scream. His cheek pressed against the cold ground, his breath coming in sharp gasps. She applied just enough pressure to make her point, not enough to cause permanent damage. The line between control and injury was measured in millimeters. She knew exactly where it was. Do you have any other questions about my qualifications? She asked. Her voice was still calm. The equipment bay door opened. Chief Warren Briggs stepped inside, followed by another instructor. Both men wore the kind of expression that said they'd been watching this unfold from the beginning. Briggs was 48 years old, a Desert Storm veteran with a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen things most people only had nightmares about. He'd served with Kira in another life, before she'd been medically transferred off combat deployments, before she'd resurfaced here wearing the bland uniform of a support instructor. He knew what these three candidates didn't. He knew about Desert Storm, about the bunker complex outside Kuwait City in February of 1991, about the mission that had gone wrong and the teammates who hadn't come home, about the woman who'd carried two wounded operators through hostile fire with shrapnel in her shoulder and a promise burning in her chest. Candidates, Briggs said. His voice carried the weight of 2 decades in the teams. You're done here. Follow Instructor Phillips to the medical bay for screening. Then you're confined to barracks under watch until Senior Chief Cross briefs you at 0600. Jackson slowly got to his feet. His face was pale. His shoulder ached. His pride was shattered. He looked at Kira like he was seeing her for the first time. She met his gaze without expression, without satisfaction, without anger. Just that flat gray stare that said she'd survived worse than him on her worst day. The 3 candidates left. The door closed behind them. The equipment bay fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of surf torture echoing across the compound. Kira straightened the medical supplies she'd been restocking before the interruption. Her hands were steady. They always were after contact. It was the hours afterward when the adrenaline burned off and the silence pressed in that the shaking started. But she didn't shake tonight. Briggs approached. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood there with his arms crossed, studying her face. You knew they were coming, he said finally. It wasn't a question. They've been watching me for 2 weeks, Kira replied. Building courage, feeding off each other. It was only a matter of time. You could have reported them, could have had them removed from training before it got physical. Where's the documented evidence in that? She turned to face him. This way we have assault on an instructor on camera. We have witnesses. We have medical screening showing a put him down without causing injury. Everything by the book. Briggs shook his head. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Hawk would be proud, he said. That's exactly how he would have handled it. The name hung in the air between them like smoke, like the ghost it was. Lieutenant Colonel Dane Ashford, call sign Hawk, killed in action February 28, 1991 during Operation Desert Storm. 11 years dead, still teaching lessons from beyond the grave. Kira's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A shadow, a weight that never quite lifted. Hawk would have told them to quit while they were ahead, she said quietly. He was always better at de-escalation than I am. You gave them 10 seconds. That's more warning than most would get. 10 seconds they didn't take. Briggs sighed. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes he wasn't supposed to have and lit one, cracking the door to let the smoke drift out into the night. Cross is going to offer them a choice, he said. Standard protocol, immediate disenrollment and UCMJ charges, or they can volunteer for a remedial training evolution. Your design, your rules. If they complete it to standard and you sign off, he'll recommend retention with formal counseling. And if they refuse, then they're gone. Simple as that. Kira was quiet for a moment. Outside, the sound of the ocean rolled across the base like a promise, like a threat. The water that had broken thousands of candidates. The water that had forged the ones who survived into something harder than steel. They'll take it, she said. Men like Jackson Brennan don't quit. They double down. They need to prove they're not weak. You sure about that? I'm sure. Briggs took a long drag on his cigarette. The ember glowed orange in the dim light. You know what you're doing, right? He asked. This isn't just about 3 candidates who got too big for their boots. Command is watching. The XO wants your head. Post-September 11th, there's pressure from Congress about training standards, about readiness, about whether we're too soft or too hard. You design an evolution that breaks them, you're done. You design one that's too easy, you're done. The window is about this big. He held his thumb and forefinger an inch apart. I know. And you're doing it anyway. I made a promise, Chief. Briggs nodded slowly. He understood promises. He'd been there when Hawk made Kira swear hers. He'd heard it through the chaos of radio traffic and explosions. He'd watched her face when she came back without their lieutenant colonel. When she'd kept moving despite the shrapnel and the shock and the grief because that's what operators did. They completed the mission. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He left. The door closed. Kira was alone again in the equipment bay, surrounded by the tools of her trade. Medical kits, training rifles, GPS units, all the equipment that went into making SEALs. All the equipment that couldn't make the one thing that actually mattered: heart. She walked to the small office attached to the bay. It was barely more than a converted storage closet. A desk, a chair, a corkboard on the wall. She'd been assigned this space 2 years ago when she'd taken the instructor billet. Nobody questioned it. Nobody cared. That's exactly what she'd wanted. On the corkboard was a single photograph. 8 operators in desert camouflage standing in front of a battered Humvee somewhere outside Kuwait City. The year was 91. The war was Desert Storm. The mission was supposed to be simple. Lieutenant Colonel Dane Hawk Ashford stood in the center, his arms slung over the shoulders of the men beside him. His grin was wide and unguarded, the kind of smile that came from a man who loved his job and believed in the mission and trusted his team completely. Kira stood at the edge of the frame, 19 years old, barely visible, her face half shadowed by her helmet. She looked young in that photo, untested, like she didn't quite know what she was walking into. She knew now. She pulled her shirt over her head and looked down at the tattoo over her heart, a trident, faded after 11 years, the lines blurring slightly at the edges, but the symbol remained. Earning it had nearly killed her. Keeping it after Hawk died had felt like a betrayal, like she didn't deserve to wear it when he never would again. But promises were promises. She'd carried him out of that bunker complex, not his body, not in the end, but his memory, his final order, his belief that the next generation deserved to be trained by someone who knew the cost of failure, someone who'd paid it. Kira touched the faded ink over her heart, whispered to the empty room and the ghost that lived there. 10 years, Hawk, still keeping it. The photograph didn't answer, the dead never did, but she felt the weight of that promise like a physical thing, like armor, like a burden she'd carry until the day she could pass it to someone else, until she could train them well enough that they'd survive what she'd survived, that they'd come home when she couldn't bring Hawk home. She pulled her shirt back on, turned off the light, walked out into the December night where the sound of the Pacific Ocean rolled across Naval Amphibious Base Coronado like the heartbeat of something ancient and unforgiving. Tomorrow would bring Senior Chief Nathan Cross in his formal briefing. Tomorrow would bring the choice. Tomorrow would begin the evolution she'd been designing in her head for 2 years. An evolution that would break Jackson Brennan and Derek Hale and Tyler Vaughn down to their foundation and either rebuild them into operators worth a damn or prove they didn't belong here in the first place. But tonight she stood alone in the darkness and remembered. Remembered a different night, a different base, a different version of herself who didn't know what combat felt like or what it meant to lose someone who mattered. Fayetteville, North Carolina, 1980. Kira was 8 years old. Her father, Master Sergeant Robert Blackwell, was a Ranger, 75th Regiment. He trained during the tail end of the Cold War, had deployed to Grenada in 1983, had seen things he never talked about except in the careful lessons he taught his daughter. That night outside a bar 3 miles from Fort Bragg, a drunk soldier twice his size tried to start a fight. Kira watched from the truck, watched her father move with that same economical precision she'd learned years later, watched him disarm the situation without throwing a punch, without raising his voice, just controlled movement and a calm expression that never changed. 4 seconds. That's all it took. Afterward, in the truck on the way home, he'd said something she never forgot. Violence is loud and clumsy, Kira. It's the tool of people who were never taught control. Real operators move like water. They adapt. They flow. They strike only when necessary and only as hard as the situation demands. He made her practice falling until she could roll across gravel without making a sound, taught her to regulate her breathing until her heart rate dropped on command. By the time she was 16, she could put a grown man on the ground before he realized she'd moved. She joined the Navy at 18. 1990, the year the world was changing. The Cold War was ending. The Soviet Union was collapsing. But new threats were emerging, new missions, new requirements. And the Navy had just started an experimental program. 5 women, selected for their physical and mental resilience, invited to attempt what no woman had officially attempted before. BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition or SEAL Training, the course that broke 70% of men who attempted it. Kira volunteered, not because she wanted to prove a point about gender equality, not because she had something to prove to anyone except herself. She volunteered because her father had taught her that competence was the only currency that mattered, that operators moved like water, that discipline was stronger than violence. She volunteered because she wanted to be the best, and because a man named Dane Ashford believed she could be. Lieutenant Dane Ashford was 38 years old when Kira met him in 1990. He'd been a SEAL for 15 years, had run operations in Central America during the Cold War that were still classified, had deployed to Grenada in 1983 alongside men like her father, had earned his trident when earning it meant something the old guard recognized and respected. He was assigned as one of the cadre overseeing the experimental female integration program, not because he wanted to be, because he was ordered to be. But somewhere during Hell Week, when Kira was shivering in the surf at 300 hours, with hypothermia setting in and every fiber of her being screaming to quit, he'd seen something. He'd seen her refuse to ring the bell, seen her put herself back together faster than the instructors could break her, seen her carry a boat on her head until her neck vertebrae compressed and her vision went black at the edges, but she didn't drop it. Seen her adapt, flow, move like water. After Hell Week, he'd pulled her aside. "You've got something most of these candidates don't," he'd said. "You've got discipline, real discipline, not the kind that comes from being yelled at, the kind that comes from knowing who you are when nobody's watching." "Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. I'm not doing you any favors. The moment you show weakness, the moment you prove you don't belong, I'll drop you myself. Understood?" "Understood, sir." "Good. Now get back to training." She was rolled back once. Shin splints that required 4 weeks of recovery. The cadre told her it was over, that she should quit while she had her dignity. Hawk told them to give her the 4 weeks. She came back stronger. She perforated an eardrum during dive phase. The pain was excruciating. The risk of permanent damage was real. Hawk monitored her personally, made sure the corpsman cleared each her, made sure she had the time to heal properly. She came back stronger. She contracted walking pneumonia during land warfare, could barely breathe during the long rucks through the mountains. Other candidates were dropping from the same illness. Hawk watched her like his career depended on it, because it did. The experimental program was under constant scrutiny. Any failure would be used as ammunition to shut it down. She didn't fail. She earned her trident in early 1991, one of 5 women to do so, the first class to officially integrate. 2 weeks later, Iraq invaded Kuwait. 4 months after that, Kira deployed to Desert Storm with SEAL Team 8, assigned to Hawk's platoon. 19 years old, first combat deployment, first real test of everything she'd learned. It should have been simple: clear a bunker complex, rescue a downed pilot. Iraqi forces were retreating. The war was nearly over. It should have been simple, but nothing in combat was ever simple. Kira stood in the darkness outside the equipment bay, remembering that night, remembering the sound of explosions and the smell of cordite and burning oil, remembering Hawk's voice on the radio, calling coordinates for an airstrike that would consume his position, remembering the promise she'd made in the case and the fire. 11 years ago, February 28, 1991, the night she'd lost the man who'd believed in her when nobody else did, the night she'd sworn she'd train the next generation to survive what he hadn't. A door opened behind her. She turned. Chief Briggs stood in the entrance to the training office, backlit by fluorescent light. "Cross wants to see you," he said. 600. "Bring your evolution plan." "It's ready." "I figured it would be." He closed the door. Kira walked across the compound toward the small quarters she'd been assigned, a converted storage room behind the main instructor building. It smelled like old paint and seawater. It had a bed, a desk, and a footlocker. It was all she needed. She lay down fully clothed, stared at the ceiling, Thought about Jackson Brennan and Derek Hale and Tyler Vaughn. Thought about the evolution she'd designed. Thought about whether it would break them or build them. Thought about Hawk and the promise and the weight of carrying the dead forward into the future. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did. But she closed her eyes and controlled her breathing the way her father had taught her 30 years ago. The way Hawk had reinforced during buds. The way that had kept her alive when men twice her size were dying around her. 4 counts in, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out. It flow. Move like water. Tomorrow she would find out if Jackson Brennan and Derek Hale and Tyler Vaughn had what it took to become operators. Tomorrow she would start keeping her promise again. Tomorrow Hawk's legacy would continue. Whether they knew it or not. Whether they were ready or not. Whether they survived it or not. At 0600 hours, Senior Chief Nathan Cross sat behind his desk in the Training Administration Building. He was 52 years old, 20 years in the teams, a face carved from granite and a reputation for ending careers with a single phone call. The 3 candidates stood at attention in front of him. Jackson Brennan's shoulder still ached from where Kira had locked it the night before. Derek Hale's knuckles were white. Tyler Vaughn was pale. Cross let them stand there for a full minute before he spoke. The silence was deliberate, oppressive, the kind of silence that made men think about their choices. Assault on an instructor, Cross said finally. His voice was flat, emotionless. Even a failed assault, that's grounds for immediate dismissal from this program. Potential UCMJ charges under Article 128, assault on a petty officer. He let that sink in, watched their faces, watched the realization dawn that their military careers might be over before they really began. NCIS has been notified. Protocol requires it. The incident is fully documented. Witness statements, security footage. Medical screening cleared all parties of injury. Jackson's jaw tightened. Derek's breathing quickened. Tyler looked like he might be sick. You have 2 choices, Cross continued. Accept immediate disenrollment from Bud ES and face potential non-judicial punishment, or volunteer for an authorized remedial training evolution, designed by Petty Officer Blackwell, supervised by the cadre. If you complete it to standard, and if Petty Officer Blackwell signs off on your performance, I will recommend to the commanding officer that you be retained in training with formal counseling rather than separation. He pulled 3 documents from his desk, set them down. The document is already prepared. You each have 60 seconds to decide. Sign it or walk away. Your choice. Jackson was the first to move. He grabbed the pen, signed without hesitation. His pride wouldn't let him quit, couldn't let him admit defeat. Derek followed. His hands were steady. This was just another fight, another challenge. He'd faced worse in the cage. Tyler hesitated. His instinct was to talk, to charm his way out, to find an angle. But there was no angle here, no way around it. He signed. Cross collected the documents, filed them, looked at each candidate in turn. The evolution is scheduled for next week, 5 days from now. That gives you time to prepare physically and mentally. You'll be briefed on requirements the day before. Medical will monitor throughout. Safety protocols will be observed. But understand this. He leaned forward. His eyes were hard. This isn't punishment. This is education. Petty Officer Blackwell is offering you something most candidates never get. A second chance after a serious mistake. A lesson you'll remember for the rest of your career. If you have one. He dismissed them. They left. The door closed. Kira entered from the side office where she'd been listening. Cross looked up at her. They signed, he said. I knew they would. This better work, Blackwell. The XO is already asking questions. Post-September 11th, there's scrutiny on everything we do. If this evolution goes sideways, if anyone gets hurt beyond minor injuries, it's both our asses. It won't go sideways. You sound confident. I am confident, Senior Chief. I've been designing this evolution for 2 years. Every scenario is something I've survived. Every challenge is something that taught me a lesson I needed to learn. I'm just passing it forward. Cross studied her face, saw the determination there, the certainty, the weight of carrying something forward that was bigger than her career or their careers, or even the 3 candidates who just signed their names to a document they didn't fully understand. Hawk trained you well, he said quietly. Hawk taught me that competence matters more than comfort, that hard lessons save lives, that the only easy day was yesterday. And you think these three can learn that? I think they can learn it or they can wash out. Either way, they'll understand what it takes to be an operator, and that's more than they understood 48 hours ago. Cross nodded. He pulled out a folder, set it on the desk. Your evolution plan. I reviewed it. It's approved. Medical is briefed. Safety team is assigned. Observers will monitor for documentation purposes. He looked up at her. Don't make me regret this. You won't, Senior Chief. She left his office. The morning sun was breaking over the base. Hell Week candidates were running the obstacle course. Their grunts and shouts echoed across the compound. The sound of training. The sound of breaking and rebuilding. The sound of making seals. Kira walked to the equipment bay. She had 5 days to prepare. 5 days to gather the gear. 5 days to finalize the routes and waypoints in scenarios. 5 days before Jackson Brennan and Derek Hale and Tyler Vaughn learned what it really meant to be tested. But first she needed to remember. Needed to go back to that night in February of 1991. Needed to relive the mission that had cost Hawk his life and taught her the lessons she was about to pass forward. In her quarters that night, Kira sat at her desk. The photograph of her team was pinned to the corkboard. 8 operators, Desert Storm, Kuwait City, 1991. She touched Hawk's face in the image. Her finger traced the outline of his smile, the confidence in his eyes, the certainty that came from 15 years as a SEAL and the belief that his team could handle anything. They're coming, Hawk, she whispered. 3 more who need to learn what you taught me, what you died teaching me. The photograph didn't answer, but in her mind she heard his voice as clearly as she'd heard it that night over the radio. Calm, controlled, even as he called in fire on his own position. Train the next generation, Kira. Make them ready. Promise me. I promise, sir. 11 years later, she was still keeping it. And in 5 days, Jackson Brennan and Derek Hale and Tyler Vaughn would begin learning why. Day 2 began at 05:30 hours under a sky the color of gunmetal. The candidates had slept 3 hours. Maybe. Their muscles were seizing. Their minds were fractured. The kind of exhaustion that made simple decisions feel impossible. Kira stood at the rally point, wearing the same 60-pound ruck they carried. Her face showed nothing. No satisfaction, no sympathy. Just that flat gray stare that said she'd survived worse on less sleep with worse injuries. Move out, she said. They moved. Mile 12 brought the first real breakdown. Not physical, not yet, but something deeper. The kind of fracture that happened when men realized they weren't as strong as they thought they were. Jackson's ankle had swollen overnight. Not enough to fail medical screening. Not enough to justify quitting. Just enough to make every step a small negotiation with pain. His pride kept him moving. His body was starting to argue. Derek's shoulders were cramping from yesterday's casualty carry. The muscle fibers were torn in ways that wouldn't heal for weeks. Every time he adjusted, his ruck lightning shot down his arms. He'd taken worse beatings in the cage. But cage fights ended in 3 rounds. This just kept going. Tyler was somewhere past exhaustion and into a place where his vision kept tunneling at the edges. Dehydration setting in despite the water they were forced to drink at every checkpoint. His body was cannibalizing itself, burning muscle for fuel, shutting down non-essential systems to keep the core alive. The safety vehicle followed a quarter-mile behind. 2 instructors with medical supplies and the authority to call it and if anyone crossed from suffering into danger. The line was thin, but it existed. They knew where it was. So did Kira. Mile 15 brought the second navigation challenge. The trail they'd been following simply ended, disappeared into dense scrub and rocky terrain that looked the same in every direction. Cross appeared from the tree line. He handed Kira a new set of GPS coordinates. She glanced at them once, committed them to memory, turned to the candidates. Revised waypoint, she said. You have 4 hours to reach it. The terrain is uncharted. There's no established path. Figure it out or fail. Jackson stared at the GPS unit in his hand. The coordinates made no sense. The topography didn't match. It was like being handed a puzzle with half the pieces missing. This is impossible, he said. His voice was raw. The waypoint is behind that ridge, but there's no way through. Then find one, Kira replied. We need more time. You don't get more time. The enemy doesn't wait for you to figure out the map. The mission doesn't pause because you're confused. Derek stepped forward. His jaw was tight. What if we can't make it in 4 hours? Then you restart from day one, all of you, together, because in combat, one person's failure gets everyone killed. The weight of that settled over them like a shroud. They weren't just responsible for themselves anymore. They were responsible for each other. Failure meant collective punishment. Success required collective effort. It was the first real lesson. They stumbled through the scrub for 3 hours, arguing, second-guessing. Yeah. Tyler kept suggesting shortcuts that turned into dead ends. Jackson kept trying to lead, but his injured ankle slowed the pace. Derek stayed quiet, following his shoulders, screaming with every step. They made the checkpoint with 11 minutes to spare, collapsed in a heap of sweat and dust and relief. Kira watched them, said nothing, moved to the next rally point. The pattern continued. Mile 16, mile 17, each one harder than the last. Each challenge designed to strip away another layer of false confidence. At mile 18, they crested a ridge and found Cross waiting with a whiteboard. The sun was directly overhead. The temperature had climbed to 90 degrees, no shade, no relief, just heat and exhaustion and the thin edge of mental collapse. Cross set the whiteboard on a folding table, pulled out a marker, started writing. Tactical scenario, he said. His voice carried across the ridge like a pronouncement. Iraqi Republican Guard forces have ambushed a coalition convoy 5 clicks north of your position. 4 wounded, 1 critical with arterial bleeding. You have 20 minutes to plan an extraction route, identify rally points, establish communication protocols, and brief your plan to me. If you fail to brief, you restart this evolution from day one. He tapped the whiteboard. Clock starts now. Jackson grabbed the map. His hands were shaking, from exhaustion or fear or both. He spread it on the ground. The other 2 crowded around. Okay, Jackson said, we need to approach from the north. Use the wadi for cover. That's suicide, Derek said. The wadi is a natural kill zone. They'll have it pre-sighted. Then what's your plan? I don't know. I can't think. Tyler leaned over the map. His vision was blurring. The lines kept swimming. What about coming in from the east higher ground? That adds 2 clicks to the route. The critical casualty dies before we get there. So what do we do? The argument spiraled, voices rising, tension mounting, each suggestion met with counter-argument, each plan falling apart under the weight of variables they couldn't account for. The minutes ticked away. 15 minutes left. 10 minutes. 5. Jackson tried to sketch a plan on the whiteboard. His hand kept cramping. The marker kept slipping. Nothing he wrote made tactical sense. He could see it even as he was writing it. See the holes in his logic. The mistakes that would get people killed. Derek tried to take over, started shouting about flanking movements and suppressing fire. But he had no training for this. No framework. Just fragments of action movies and MMA bravado that meant nothing here. Tyler stood to the side, silent, watching them fall apart, knowing he should help but having nothing to contribute. Time expired. Cross looked at the whiteboard, looked at their faces, said nothing for a long moment. Then he erased everything they'd written. You failed. Pack your gear. We're restarting from day one tomorrow morning. The words hit like hammer blows. Jackson's face went white. Derek's hands clenched into fists. Tyler actually sat down in the dirt, head in his hands. They'd come so far, suffered so much, and it was all about to be erased. 48 hours of pain for nothing. Kira stepped forward. Her movement was deliberate, controlled. She took the marker from Cross's hand, turned to the whiteboard. Watch, she said. Then she delivered the perfect tactical brief. Her voice was calm, authoritative, stripped of emotion but filled with certainty. She outlined the extraction route in 90 seconds flat, identified 3 contingency plans based on enemy response, specified communication frequencies and casualty triage priorities, designated rally points and fallback positions, calculated timelines down to the minute. It was flawless. The kind of brief that came from someone who'd run these operations for real, who'd made these calculations under fire, who'd lived through the consequences of getting it wrong. When she finished, Cross nodded once. That's the standard. That's what right looks like. Derek's voice was quiet, almost broken. How do you know all this? Kira turned to face them. The sun was behind her. Her face was shadowed, but her eyes were visible, gray and flat and filled with something they couldn't name. Because I've run this exact mission, she said. February 28th, 1991, Desert Storm, outside Kuwait City. My platoon commander died because we didn't have contingencies. Because our intelligence was bad and our planning was overconfident, and when things went wrong, it didn't have a backup plan. She paused. Let them see the weight she carried. You just experienced 10% of that stress, maybe less. Imagine 100%, real bullets, real blood, your best friend screaming for help you can't give because you didn't plan well enough, because you thought being tough was enough, because you confused confidence with competence. The silence on that ridge was absolute. Cross picked up his whiteboard. You didn't restart, not today, but you learned why planning matters, why discipline matters, why thinking clearly under stress isn't optional. He pointed down the trail. 4 more miles to tonight's camp. Move out. They moved, but something had changed. They weren't competing with Kira anymore. They were trying to understand her, trying to comprehend what she'd survived that made this evolution look easy by comparison. That night in the camp, Jackson approached her position. She was sitting apart from them, back against a rock, staring at nothing. Petty Officer Blackwell, he said. His voice was hoarse from shouting and dehydration. Can I ask you something? You can ask. That mission you mentioned, Desert Storm, what happened? Kira was quiet for a long moment. The desert night was cold. The stars were bright overhead. The same stars that had been above her 11 years ago when her world had burned. February 28th, 1991, she said. The ground war was almost over. 100-hour war, they called it later. Iraqi forces were retreating. We thought it was mopping up. She pulled her knees up, rested her arms across them. Her voice was steady but distant, like she was reading from a script written in fire and blood. My platoon was tasked with clearing a bunker complex, though, outside Kuwait City. Intelligence said light resistance. There was a downed pilot, F-16, Captain Richards. We were supposed to grab him and get out. Simple recovery operation. What went wrong? Everything. February 27, 1991, 2300 hours. The briefing room smelled like coffee and diesel fuel. SEAL Team 8 Platoon 2 sat around a folding table covered in maps and satellite imagery. The air was thick with anticipation. The ground war had been going for 2 days. The Iraqi army was collapsing. Victory was inevitable. Lieutenant Colonel Dane Ashford stood at the head of the table. 38 years old, 15 years in the teams, face weathered from a decade and a half of operations the public would never know about. Cold War missions in Central America, Grenada in '83, Panama in '89. He'd earned his reputation in places where cameras didn't follow. Listen up, he said, his voice cut through the chatter. We've got a downed pilot. F-16 took ground fire north of Kuwait City this morning. Pilot ejected. Last known position is here. He tapped the map. Bunker complex, pre-war Iraqi defensive position. Intelligence from Army forward elements says Iraqi forces abandoned it during the retreat. Light resistance expected. Chief Warren Briggs, the radio operator, leaned forward. Single source intel surpassed. Confirmed by aerial reconnaissance, the bunkers appear abandoned. Appears. That's the word from higher. Our mission is recovery. Get in, grab. Captain Richards, get out. Helos will extract from this LZ. He marked the landing zone. 6 clicks from the bunker. Questions? Petty Officer Evan Sullivan raised his hand. He was 24 years old, the team's breacher. He had a girlfriend waiting in San Diego and a smile that could light up the darkest spaces. How long has the pilot been down, sir? 14 hours. So we're assuming he's either captured or dead. We're assuming nothing. We're recovering him, dead or alive. Sullivan nodded. Yes, sir. Kira sat at the edge of the table, 19 years old, the youngest on the team, one of 5 women who'd earned their trident that year. She'd been with the platoon for 3 months. This was her first real combat operation. Training exercises and workups didn't count. This was the first time she'd crossed the line from preparation into execution. Hawk noticed her silence. Blackwell, you with us? Yes, sir. First time under fire. It's different from training. Your body will want to freeze. Your mind will want to shut down. Don't let it. Trust your training. Trust your team. Stay sharp. Understood, sir? Good. The brief continued. Rally points, communication protocols, contingency plans if the helos were delayed, medical supplies checked, weapons cleaned, ammunition loaded, the familiar ritual of preparation that every operator knew by heart. At 200 hours, they loaded onto helicopters. The flight was low and fast. The desert below was dark except for the occasional fire from burning oil wells. The Iraqi army had set them ablaze during their retreat. Black smoke filled the sky, turned day into night and night into something darker. They set down 2 clicks from the target. The helos lifted off immediately, disappearing into the smoke-filled sky. 8 operators, full kit, night vision goggles turning the world into shades of green and black. The bunker complex was ahead, silent, dark, too silent. Hawk signaled. They moved in tactical column, Sullivan on point, Briggs with the radio, Kira in the middle. Her heart was pounding, but her breathing was controlled. 4 counts in, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out. The breathing technique her father had taught her. They reached the first bunker. Sullivan placed shaped charges on the door, stepped back, detonated. The door blew inward. They entered fast. Room clear, empty. The second bunker was the same. Abandoned, equipment scattered, signs of hasty retreat. Maybe the intelligence was right. Maybe the Iraqis were gone. Then they found Captain Richards. He was in the third bunker, alive. Barely. His leg was shattered below the knee. Makeshift splint applied. He'd been there for 14 hours, alone, waiting. SEAL Team, Hawk said, kneeling beside him. We're getting you out. Richard's eyes focused. There were guards. Yesterday. They left this morning. How many? Maybe 20. Republican Guard. They said they were pulling back to defend Baghdad. Sullivan was already prepping the casualty for movement. Sir, his leg is bad. We need to move careful or he goes into shock. Understood. Briggs, call the helos. Tell them we have the package. 10 minutes to LZ. Briggs keyed his radio, started transmitting. That's when the world exploded. The bunker complex hadn't been abandoned. It had been bait. Secondary charges detonated throughout the structure. Pre-rigged. Waiting. The Iraqi forces hadn't retreated. They'd pulled back and set an ambush for exactly this kind of rescue operation. The ceiling collapsed. Kira was thrown backward through the door into the open air. Her plate carrier absorbed the impact, but the force drove a rib into her chest wall. Sharp pain, difficulty breathing, partial pneumothorax, lung partially collapsed. She hit the ground, rolled, came up gasping. Behind her, the bunker complex was coming apart. Explosions rippling through the structure. Smoke and dust and screaming. Sullivan's voice. I'm hit. Kira went back in. The training took over. The fear evaporated. There was only the mission, only the movement, only the need to get her teammate out. She found Sullivan in the rubble. His right leg was nearly severed below the knee. Arterial bleeding, bright red blood pumping with each heartbeat. He was screaming, hands trying to hold the leg together. Doc, I need Doc. Kira grabbed a tourniquet from her kit, applied it above the wound, twisted it tight. Sullivan screamed louder. The pain was excruciating, but the bleeding slowed, stopped. You're okay, she said. Her voice was steady even though her lung was damaged and her chest felt like it was on fire. I've got you. Not today, Doc. Not on my watch. She grabbed him under the arms, started dragging. 180 pounds of operator and gear. Her shoulder protested. Her ribs screamed. She ignored both. She got him outside, into cover behind a Humvee that had been abandoned by the Iraqis. Then she went back for the others. The bunker complex was a maze now. Collapsed walls, fires burning, the smell of cordite and burning oil, and something worse, something organic. She found Hawk. He was in what remained of the third bunker. Captain Richards was beside him, still alive, but trapped. A concrete beam had fallen across Richard's pelvis, pinning him, crushing him. Hawk was trying to lift the beam. Couldn't. Not alone. Blackwell, relief in his voice. Help me. They tried together. The beam was too heavy. Thousands of pounds of reinforced concrete. It wouldn't budge. Outside, gunfire erupted. The Iraqi forces were counterattacking. The ambush wasn't just the explosives. It was a full tactical trap. Briggs's voice on the radio. Hawk, we're taking fire. Multiple hostiles. Hawk keyed his mic. Copy. Hold position. We're bringing Richards out. But they couldn't. The beam wouldn't move. Richards looked up at them. His face was gray, going into shock. Leave me. Get your team out. Not happening, Captain, Hawk said. That's an order. You're not my commander, sir. With respect. More explosions outside, RPGs hitting their position. The walls were coming down. The entire complex was becoming a tomb. Briggs appeared in the doorway. Hawk, we need to move now. We're not leaving him. The building is coming down. We stay, we all die. Hawk looked at the beam, at Richards, at Kira, at the impossible choice. Then he made the decision that would haunt Kira for the rest of her life. Get Sullivan to the LZ, he said to Briggs. Take the team. I'll stay with Richards. Call close air support. Coordinates will be my position. Danger close. Understanding dawned on Briggs' face. Horror. Hawk, no. That's an order, Chief. Get them out. Sir, go! Briggs grabbed Kira's arm, tried to pull her toward the exit. She resisted. We can't leave him, she said. Hawk turned to her. His face was calm, the same expression he'd worn during Hell Week when she'd wanted to quit. The same certainty, the same absolute confidence in his decision. Petty Officer Blackwell, he said, formal, final. You're going to make it out of here. You're going to survive this deployment. And when you do, you're going to make me a promise. Sir, listen carefully. You're going to train the next generation of operators. You are going to make sure they're ready for missions like this. You're going to teach them that competence saves lives, that planning matters, that overconfidence kills. Promise me, Kira. She'd never heard him use her first name before. Tears were streaming down her face. I promise, sir. Good. Now get the hell out of my bunker. That's my final order. Briggs dragged her out. The team was moving. Sullivan being carried by two operators. Captain Richards still trapped with Hawk. They ran through the kill zone, under fire. Kira's chest was on fire. Her shoulder was bleeding from shrapnel she hadn't noticed. She kept moving. Behind them, Hawk's voice on the radio, calm, professional, calling coordinates for close air support. His own coordinates. Danger close meant the ordnance would be dropped within 600 meters of friendly forces. Hawk was calling it on his position. 0 meters. He was painting the target on himself, to give them time to escape, to complete the mission, to bring the team home. The airstrike came 30 seconds later, F-16s screaming overhead. Bombs falling, the bunker complex disappeared in fire and smoke and thunder. When the dust cleared, there was nothing left. Hawk was gone. Captain Richards was gone. 3 other teammates who'd been trying to fight their way back into the complex were gone. 5 operators lost, in a mission that was supposed to be simple, in a war that was supposed to be over. Kira stood on that ridge in December 2001, 10 years removed from that night, and her voice was steady as she told the story. Jackson and Derek and Tyler sat in silence. The training evolution suddenly made sense. The scenarios, the challenges, the impossible choices. This wasn't about punishment. This was about preparing them for the reality that awaited. The reality where missions go wrong, where intelligence is bad, where the difference between life and death is measured in planning and discipline, and the ability to think clearly when everything is burning. Hawk stayed so we could live, Kira said. He made that choice in seconds. No hesitation. That's what operators do. That's what leaders do. They make the hard calls. They bear the weight. She looked at each of them. You want to be SEALs, you want to wear the trident. Then you need to understand what it was, not just physically, not just mentally, but the weight of knowing that your decisions determine whether your teammates go home alive or in body bags. Jackson's voice was quiet. I'm sorry, Petty Officer, for what happened, for what we did. I don't need your apology. I need you to learn. That's why we're here. She stood. 4 more miles, let's move. Day 3 began before dawn. The candidates were broken, not just physically, something deeper. The evolution had stripped them down to their foundation. Now came the rebuilding. Mile 22 brought the physical collapse. Jackson's ankle finally gave out. He went down hard, tried to stand, couldn't. Derek and Tyler looked at each other, then at Kira. She said nothing, just watched. They made their choice. Grabbed Jackson under the arms. Half carried, half dragged him forward. Mile 24. Derek's shoulders were destroyed. The pain was so intense he couldn't lift his arms above his waist. Tyler was barely conscious. Dehydration and exhaustion blurring his vision. But they kept moving. Mile 26. The final push. 4 miles to the finish. Uphill. Soft sand. Every step a battle against gravity and muscle failure. Kira ran beside them. Same load, same conditions, no signs of struggle. Sullivan crawled 100 meters on one leg, she said, to provide covering fire so we could recover Hawk's body. His leg was shattered. He was going into shock. He still completed his mission. She looked at Jackson. Your ankle hurts. Can you walk? Jackson's face was streaked with sweat and dust. Yes, petty officer. Derek, your shoulders are destroyed. Can you move? Yes, petty officer. Tyler, you're dehydrated. Can you finish? Tyler's voice cracked. I can finish. They carried each other through those final 4 miles. Reached the checkpoint 35 minutes past the standard. Medical screening, no serious injuries, severe exhaustion, dehydration, muscle damage that would take weeks to heal, but nothing permanent. Cross approached Kira. They passed, barely. Barely is enough. Command wants to see you tomorrow. 0800, formal briefing. The XO. The XO compiled a report. He's arguing dangerous training practices. Post-September 11th liability. He wants the evolution declared invalid. Wants you investigated. Kira touched the faded trident beneath her shirt. Let him come. This could end your career. So could backing down. Hawk didn't back down. I won't either. 3 days later, in a room full of command staff, the truth would be revealed. But tonight, Kira stood alone in the darkness and remembered the promise. Remembered Hawk's voice on the radio. Remembered the fire and the smoke and the choice that cost him everything. She was keeping her promise, no matter what it cost her. 3 days passed in mandatory recovery. The candidates slept, ate, had their bodies assessed by medical staff who documented every injury with clinical precision. Sprained ankle, torn rotator cuff muscles, severe dehydration requiring IV fluids, muscle damage consistent with extreme exertion. Nothing permanent, nothing that wouldn't heal. But something else had been damaged, something deeper. The armor of arrogance they'd worn like second skin had been stripped away. What remained was raw, uncertain, open to the possibility that everything they thought they knew about strength was wrong. On the morning of the 4th day, they were summoned. The conference room in the training administration building was larger than they expected. Long table, chairs arranged in rows, windows overlooking the Pacific where the morning sun turned the water into hammered silver. Command staff filed in. The executive officer, the senior enlisted leader, Chief Briggs, 2 observers from Naval Special Warfare Command, a representative from NCIS who sat in the corner with a folder that looked ominously thick. Senior Chief Cross entered last. His face was carved granite, unreadable. Jackson, Derek, and Tyler stood at attention. Their uniforms were crisp. Their bodies still ached. Their minds were racing through possibilities. Would they be retained, expelled? Was this a formality before punishment? Cross moved to the front of the room. He held a single folder. The silence stretched, deliberate, oppressive, the kind of silence that made men think about consequences. Candidates Cole, Brennan, Hale, and Vaughn, Cross began. His voice was formal, official. 3 days ago, you completed a remedial training evolution. Medical has cleared you. Safety observers have reviewed all documentation. Your performance has been assessed. He opened the folder, pulled out 3 sheets of paper. Before I announce the command's decision regarding your retention in Buddy Yes, there's information you need to understand. Information about the instructor who designed the evolution you just completed. He looked at each of them. Information about Petty Officer First Class Kira Blackwell. The door opened. Kira entered. She wore her service uniform, not the bland PT gear they'd seen her in for 2 weeks. Full dress, ribbons across her chest, the trident gleaming above them. She stood beside Cross. Her face showed nothing. Cross lifted the first document, started reading. Petty Officer First Class Kira Blackwell, service number, classified, current assignment shore instructor, Naval Special Warfare Basic Training Command. He paused, let them see the ribbons on her chest, let them start counting. Decorations, Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor device, Purple Heart, Combat Action Ribbon, Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with Valor device. Jackson's face went pale. Derek's hands clenched. Tyler looked like he might be sick. Cross continued, his voice steady, relentless. Service record enlisted United States Navy January 1990. Selected for experimental female SEAL integration program. One of 5 women in first integrated BUDS class. Earned Naval Special Warfare Trident February 91. He turned the page. Combat Deployments Operation Just Cause, Panama, 1989 Final Operations. Operation Desert Storm, Kuwait and Iraq, 1991. Operation Restore Hope, Somalia, 1993. Operation Uphold Democracy, Haiti, 1994. 11 additional classified deployments, locations redacted. The room was absolutely silent. The only sound was Cross's voice and the distant crash of waves against the shore. Confirmed high-value target captures 14. High-risk extractions under fire 3. Documented acts of valor rescue of 2 wounded teammates during bunker complex ambush. February 28, 1991, while suffering from shrapnel wounds and partial pneumothorax requiring emergency medical intervention in the field. Cross looked up from the document, looked at the 3 candidates who thought they were harassing a weak target. Petty Officer Blackwell was personally trained by Lieutenant Colonel Dane Ashford, killed in action February 28, 1991, during the operation in which she was wounded. Upon medical clearance and psychiatric evaluation, she requested transfer to shore instruction duty. Her stated reason, and I quote, to honor Lieutenant Colonel Ashford's final order, to train the next generation to survive what we did not. He set the document down, pulled out a photograph, passed it to Jackson, 8 operators in desert camouflage, standing in front of a Humvee. The year was 1991. The war was Desert Storm. That's SEAL Team 8 Platoon 2, Cross said. Kuwait City, February 1991. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford is in the center. The young woman barely visible at the edge of the frame is Petty Officer Blackwell, age 19. First woman to see direct combat as a SEAL. First woman to earn the Navy Cross for actions under fire. Jackson stared at the photo. His hands were trembling. He passed it to Derek. Derek to Tyler, each of them seeing the same thing, the same realization. They'd assaulted a war hero. They'd harassed someone who'd earned her place through blood and fire and sacrifice they couldn't begin to comprehend. Cross picked up the final document. The evolution you just completed was not punishment, it was education. Every scenario you faced, Petty Officer Blackwell, survived for real. Every challenge that broke you was designed to teach you lessons that cost her teammates their lives to learn. He looked at Kira, nodded once. She stepped forward, reached up to her collar, pulled it aside just enough to reveal the faded tattoo over her heart. The trident, 11 years old. The ink blurred at the edges, but the symbol unmistakable. When she spoke, her voice was steady, calm, filled with a certainty that came from carrying the dead forward all into the future. This trident doesn't make you an operator, she said. Surviving Hell Week doesn't make you an operator. Graduating Bud Chess doesn't make you an operator. She let that settle, let them feel the weight of it. What makes an operator is understanding that every decision you make could mean the difference between your teammate going home alive or going home in a body bag. She paused. Her gray eyes moved across their faces. Lieutenant Colonel Dane Ashford was the finest officer I ever served under. 15 years in the teams. Cold War operations I still can't discuss. Grenada in 1983, Panama in 1989. He trained me when the Navy didn't want women in combat roles. When bureaucracy said I didn't belong, he fought for 2 years to keep the experimental integration program alive because he believed in one thing: competence matters, nothing else. Her voice remained steady, but something shifted behind her eyes, something heavy, something that had been carried for a decade. February 28, 1991, Desert Storm. My platoon was tasked with rescuing a downed pilot from a bunker complex outside Kuwait City. Intelligence said light resistance. The intelligence was wrong. It was an ambush. Republican Guard forces, pre-rigged explosives. The complex collapsed. We had casualties. She touched the tattoo over her heart. Petty Officer Evan Sullivan lost his leg below the knee. Arterial bleeding. I applied the tourniquet. Dragged him out while my lung was partially collapsed from the blast. He's alive today, works at the VA hospital, teaches trauma medicine to corpsmen, saving lives because teammates don't quit on each other. The room was silent. Even the executive officer who'd come prepared to argue against her methods was listening. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford stayed behind with the pilot who was trapped under a concrete beam, called in an airstrike on his own position to cover our extraction. He died so 7 of us could live. His final order to me was this: train the next generation. Make them ready. Make sure they understand what it did. She looked directly at Jackson, then Derek, then Tyler. 10 years ago, I made him a promise that I would find the ones who confused arrogance with confidence, the ones who thought being tough was enough, the ones who needed to learn the difference between surviving and being ready. Her voice didn't rise, didn't need to. You 3 harassed me, assaulted me, saw a woman alone and assumed weakness. That evolution wasn't punishment. It was Lieutenant Colonel Ashford's final lesson delivered through me, paid for with his life. She stepped back, stood beside Cross. On September 11, 2001, our country was attacked. Everything changed. We're going to war. Afghanistan, probably Iraq, places we haven't imagined. Some of you won't come home, but the ones I train will be ready. They'll know the cost of poor planning. They'll value their teammates' lives above their pride. They'll be the operators this country needs. Cross picked up the final documents. Based on successful completion of the remedial evolution, Petty Officer Blackwell's recommendation and the documented evidence, the command has decided the following candidates. Cole, Brennan, Hale, and Vaughn will be retained in Bud's training with formal counseling entries in their training jackets. One additional incident of any kind will result in immediate separation. You will report to Petty Officer Blackwell for monthly progress assessments. Understood. Yes, Senior Chief, they said in unison. Their voices were quiet, humbled. Dismissed. They filed out. The command staff followed. The executive officer stopped at the door, looked back at Kira. Something in his expression had changed. Not quite respect, not quite apology, but acknowledgement. He nodded once, then left. Cross waited until the room was empty except for him and Kira. You did it, he said. They know now. Knowing isn't enough. They need to prove they learned. You really going to mentor them after what they did? Hawk mentored me when I didn't deserve it, when I was arrogant and overconfident and thought I knew everything. He broke me down and built me back. I'm just passing it forward. Cross studied her face, saw the determination there, the weight, the promise that wouldn't let her rest. He'd be proud, he said quietly. Then I'm doing it right. Week 1 began with Jackson approaching her office. He stood at attention in the doorway. His ankle was still wrapped. His pride was in pieces. Petty Officer Blackwell, he said. Permission to speak. Granted. I want to request formal mentorship. I know I don't deserve it. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I want to learn. I want to be the kind of operator you and Lieutenant Colonel Ashford were. I want to earn this. Kira looked at him, saw the sincerity, also saw the fear, the uncertainty, the realization that everything he thought he knew was wrong. I'll mentor you, she said, but understand this: one sign of disrespect toward any teammate, male or female, and you're done. No second chances. You either commit completely or you walk away now. I commit completely, Petty Officer. Good. Be at the equipment bay at 0500 tomorrow. We start with basics. Derek came next, then Tyler. Each asking the same thing, each making the same commitment. But commitment was easy in the moment. Sustaining it was harder. Week 2 brought the first test. Jackson was in the chow hall. Another candidate, a woman from the next class, dropped her tray. Food scattered across the floor. Some of the male candidates laughed, made comments about coordination, about women not belonging. Jackson's first instinct would be to join in, to rebuild his social standing through humor at someone else's expense. His mouth opened. The joke was right there. Then he remembered Kira dragging a 180-pound operator through hostile fire with a collapsed lung. He stood, walked over, helped the woman pick up her tray, said nothing, just did it and walked away. Kira watched from across the room, said nothing, but she saw it. Week 3 brought Derek's test. Another candidate bigger than him challenged him during PT, made it physical, pushed him. The old Derek would have responded with violence, would have put the man down and established dominance. Derek's hands clenched into fists. The muscle memory was there, the training from years in the cage. But then he remembered Kira's words. Violence is loud and clumsy. Real operators move like water. He stepped back, relaxed his hands, spoke calmly. We're on the same team. We don't fight each other. The other candidate backed down. The moment passed. Kira was running the obstacle course nearby, saw the whole thing, nodded once when Derek looked her way. Week 4 brought the real crisis. Tyler was caught lying about completing an equipment inspection. Small thing, easy to overlook, but Kira didn't overlook it. She pulled him aside. Her voice was quiet, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. In Desert Storm, a teammate lied about securing communications equipment, said it was good when it wasn't. Cost us 18 minutes on the medevac call when Petty Officer Sullivan was bleeding out. 3 people died waiting. Your word is everything. If I can't trust your word, I can't trust you. And if I can't trust you, you don't belong here. Tyler's face crumbled. I've lied my whole life, Petty Officer. Talked my way out of everything. I don't know how to be different. Then learn or quit. Your choice. I don't want to quit. Wanting isn't enough. Prove it. Week 5 was the breaking point. Tyler appeared at her office at 0600 before his scheduled training. His eyes were red. He hadn't slept. I can't do this, he said. I'm not strong enough. I'm not good enough. I'm going to get someone killed because I'm a fraud. Kira leaned back in her chair, studied him, saw the genuine fear, the authentic vulnerability he'd been hiding behind manipulation his entire life. Sit down, she said. He sat. You think you're the only one who feels that way? She asked. You think I didn't lie awake after Hawk died, wondering if I could have done something different, if I was strong enough, good enough. But you're a hero. I'm a person who survived something terrible and made a promise to honor the ones who didn't. That's all. I'm not special. I'm not superhuman. I'm just someone who keeps showing up. How do you do it? I remember why it matters. I remember Hawk's face when he gave me that final order. I remember Sullivan bleeding in the sand. I remember the weight of carrying them forward. That weight doesn't get lighter. You just get stronger at carrying it. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. Why do you care? He asked finally. After what I did, why give me another chance? Kira's expression softened just slightly. Because Hawk gave me chances when I didn't deserve them. When I was arrogant and overconfident and thought I knew everything. He saw something in me I didn't see in myself. He fought bureaucracy and politics in his own chain of command to keep me in the program. He believed competence could be taught, that discipline could be learned, that people could change if they wanted to badly enough. She leaned forward. I'm giving you the same chance he gave me. What you do with it is up to you. Tyler stood. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. I want to earn this, not trick my way through. I want to be real. Then be real, starting now. Week 8 brought the transformation. Tyler stopped looking for angles, stopped performing, started asking questions that showed he was thinking tactically, started helping weaker candidates without seeking credit, started being the kind of teammate others could trust. Jackson's arrogance had been replaced with something quieter, more focused. He studied, prepared, led by example rather than by demanding others follow. Derek's violence had been channeled into discipline. He became the steadying presence when others panicked, the voice of calm in chaos. They weren't perfect. They still made mistakes. But the mistakes were honest now. Mistakes of effort rather than ego. Kira watched their progress with something that might have been pride, might have been relief, might have been the feeling of keeping a promise. 6 months passed. Phase 1 of Buds concluded. The bell rang. The candidates who'd survived moved forward to Phase 2, advanced training, dive school, then weapons training, then finally, if they made it through everything, the Trident. Jackson, Derek, and Tyler were among them. The graduation was small, informal, just the candidates and their instructors. No families, no ceremony. This wasn't the end. It was barely the beginning. But it was a milestone. Proof they'd survived the first filter, the first test. Kira stood at the edge of the group, watching. Chief Briggs approached, handed her an envelope. "This came for you," he said, "from Virginia." She opened it. The handwriting was familiar, cramped. The letters formed carefully by someone who'd had to relearn fine motor control after losing a leg. The letter was from Evan Sullivan. She read it standing there in the December sun while the candidates celebrated their survival. "Kira, remember when you carried me out of that bunker? I was screaming, thought I would die, couldn't think past the pain. You said something I've never forgotten. You said, 'Not today, Doc. Not on my watch.' I teach that phrase to every corpsman who comes through my program at the VA now. Not today, not on my watch. Yesterday, one of my students saved a Marine in a training accident. Femoral artery severed, massive blood loss. The kid didn't freeze. Applied pressure, called for help, stayed calm. That Marine is alive because you saved me in 1991. Because you didn't quit when your shoulder was shredded and your lung was collapsing. Because you kept Hawk's promise. You asked me once if I blamed you for the leg. Kira, I would lose it 100 times over if it meant living to save others. You're doing the same thing now at Buds. Teaching, saving lives before the fights even start. Hawk would be damn proud. I'm proud. Semper Fi, Doc." She read it 3 times, then folded it carefully. Pinned it to the corkboard in her office next to the photograph of her team from 1991. 2 pieces of the past. 2 reminders of why she kept showing up. Jackson approached as she was leaving. His service jacket was under his arm. His face was serious. "Petty Officer Blackwell," he said, "I wanted to tell you something." "Go ahead." "I wrote my father, told him about you, about Lieutenant Colonel Ashford, about the evolution, about what I learned." He paused, his voice was thick. "My dad remembered the lieutenant colonel, said he was legendary in theater during Desert Storm, said everyone knew his name, said when he died it hit the whole community." Kira was quiet, waiting. "I told my dad I'm not following him into the defense contracting business. I'm staying Navy. I'm earning this. For real." He didn't understand at first, but I think he does now. What changed his mind? "I told him what you taught me. That strength isn't domination. It's control. It's discipline. It's being someone your teammates can trust when everything is burning." He said that's what Lieutenant Colonel Ashford believed too. He said, "I'm finally learning what matters." Jackson's voice cracked slightly. "Thank you, Petty Officer, for not giving up on me, for showing me what real strength looks like." Kira nodded. "Honor him by being that for the next generation. Pass it forward. That's how the legacy continues." "I will. I promise." Derek stopped by later that evening, found her running the beach where Hell Week candidates were shivering in the surf. "Petty Officer," he said, "I called my old MMA coach. The one who taught me violence was the answer to everything." "What did you say to him?" "I apologized. Told him I was grateful for the physical training, but that he taught me wrong about what matters. Told him you taught me discipline is stronger than violence. That real warriors know when not to fight." "How did he take it?" "He hung up on me. But I said what I needed to say. I'm not that person anymore." "Good." Tyler came last, handed her a handwritten note. His handwriting was careful, deliberate. She read it later alone in her quarters. "Petty Officer Blackwell, you saw through every lie. Everyone else in my life let me fake it, let me perform, let me hide behind manipulation. You made me real. You made me face who I actually was. I'll never forget that. And I'll never lie to a teammate again. That's my promise. I'll keep it the way you kept yours to Lieutenant Colonel Ashford. Thank you for not giving up on me. Tyler Vaughn. She pinned the note next to Sullivan's letter and the photograph. 3 pieces of evidence that the promise was being kept, that Hawk's death meant something, that the legacy was continuing. September 2002. 1 year after the attacks that changed everything. Kira ran the beach at dawn, the same beach where she trained, where she'd wanted to quit during Hell Week, where Hawk had told her she had what it took. The Hell Week candidates were in the surf now, a new class, new faces, same challenges. The instructors were running them through surf torture, the sound of orders being barked, of candidates shivering, of bells ringing as people quit, the sound of making seals. She stopped at the water's edge. The Pacific stretched to the horizon, gray and vast and eternal, the same water that had broken her, the same water that had rebuilt her into something harder. In her mind, she heard Hawk's voice, clear as the day he'd died, the last transmission before the airstrike consumed his position. Train the next generation, Kira. Make them ready. Promise me. She'd kept that promise for 11 years. Through pain and doubt and the weight of carrying the dead, through challenges to her authority and her methods, through candidates who tested her patience and her commitment. She'd kept it because promises were the only currency that mattered. Because Hawk had died believing she would. Because Sullivan had lost his leg trusting her. Because operators didn't quit on missions. And this was her mission now. Not combat operations in foreign deserts. Not direct action raids or high-value target captures. But something equally important, maybe more important. Training the ones who would go into those deserts, who would run those raids, who would face the same impossible choices she'd faced, making sure they were ready, making sure they understood the cost, making sure that when they had to make the choice Hawk made, they did it with clear eyes and steady hands and the certainty that their teammates were worth dying for. She touched the faded trident tattoo beneath her shirt, felt the ridges of scar tissue, felt the weight of 11 years. Hawk, she whispered to the dawn and the ocean and the ghost that lived in both. It's been 11 years since Desert Storm. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime. The waves crashed. The candidates screamed in the surf. The sun rose over the water. I kept the promise. 3 more ready, Jackson and Derek and Tyler. Dozens more over the years. Hundreds more to come. She paused, felt the tears she wouldn't let fall. The country's at war again. Different enemy, same stakes. These kids are heading to Afghanistan. Iraq soon, places we haven't imagined. Some won't come home, but the ones I trained will be ready. They'll know the cost of arrogance. They'll value their teammates above everything. Her voice was steady, certain. Cold War to Desert Storm to the war on terror. The torch passes, generation to generation, leader to student, teacher to warrior. That's the legacy. That's what you died for. That's what I live for. She took a breath, let it out slowly. 4 counts in, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out. The breathing technique her father taught her. That Hawk reinforced. That kept her alive when everything was burning. And I don't quit on missions, sir. Never have. Never will. She turned away from the water, walked back toward the Buds compound. The silhouette of the buildings was dark against the rising sun. The grinder where candidates did endless burpees. The obstacle course that broke bodies and built determination. The bell that people rang when they couldn't continue. The place where seals were made. Where Hawk's legacy lived on in every operator who graduated. In every candidate who learned that competence mattered more than ego. That discipline was stronger than violence. That teammates were worth dying for. She walked through the gates, past the memorial wall where names were carved in stone. Operators who'd paid the ultimate price. Hawk's name was there, 3rd row from the top. She touched it as she passed, a ritual she'd repeated for 11 years, a reminder of why she kept showing up. Behind her, the sun rose over the Pacific. A new day, a new class, New candidates who didn't know yet what they were walking into, who thought they were strong because they'd never been truly tested. She would test them, would break them down, would rebuild them into something worthy of the trident, would pass forward the lessons Hawk had died teaching her, because that was the promise, that was the mission, that was the legacy. And Kira Blackwell didn't quit on missions. In the distance, barely audible over the surf, a candidate rang the bell. Another one broken, another one who didn't have what it took. The instructor secured his helmet, sent him to medical. The process continued. Somewhere in that class was the next Jackson and Brennan, the next Derek Hale, the next Tyler Vaughn. Someone who needed to learn the difference between arrogance and confidence, between violence and strength, between surviving and being ready. Kira would find them, would break them, would rebuild them, would keep the promise. For Hawk, for Sullivan, for all the ones who'd paid the price so the next generation could learn. The torch had been passed to her in a burning bunker complex in Kuwait in 1991. Now she was passing it forward, generation to generation, teacher to student, operator to operator. The legacy of the trident, earned in blood, maintained through discipline, passed forward through those who understood what it cost. She walked into her office, looked at the corkboard, the photograph from 1991, Sullivan's letter, Tyler's note, the pieces of evidence that the promise was being kept. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper, started writing the training plan for the next class, the scenarios they would face, the lessons they would learn, the price they would pay in sweat, in pain, and humility. The same price she'd paid, the same price Hawk had paid in blood. Outside the base came alive with morning, candidates running, instructors shouting, the sound of training, the sound of making the warriors who would defend a nation still reeling from attack. And in that small office, Kira Blackwell kept working, kept planning, kept carrying the dead forward into the future, kept the promise, always.